That's right. Here we go on a Monday. It is orange and blue today. Cecil Lammy, Andrew Mason, talking about free agency, but Mace taking a overarching view into how much the Broncos have improved compared to the other teams, at least in their conference, that are also trying to improve this time as well.
It was targeted,
Yes.
no doubt about that. But as far as taking care of things that needed to be remedied, or as was said in Office Space a little over a quarter century ago, fixing the glitch, I'm not sure anybody did a better job at specifically fixing the glitch than the Denver Broncos did.
Well, let's get into it on today's program as we look to the Denver Broncos not having a running back. Before we jump into who they added, comparatively speaking, to other teams out there, Mace, if they sign a veteran running back, insert name here,
J.K. Dobbins,
Jamal Williams, if they sign one or don't sign one, I don't really think that adjusts the grade that much because the grade is pretty high already.
well, and also the real improvement is going to come from whoever you end up getting in the draft. That's where you're going to find the difference maker. Just like last year, you found your difference maker at quarterback in the draft. You're going to find your difference maker at running back in the draft. And I don't know for certain. We don't know for certain until you get to the draft. But while it is a very deep running back class, and like George Payton said last month, there's a lot of different flavors. You can find any type of running back in this draft. If you want to get the true difference makers, the guys that are really going to have that impact, you still got to go to the top of the class. So you know that Omarion Hampton and Ashton Genty are going to be those guys. And obviously it's more likely Hampton than Genty, simply because Hampton is reasonable to get, and Genty, it's not really plausible unless you do something audacious.
Right. So we'll see what the Broncos do, but running back, that's for the draft. And Mace, even if they drafted 2 first round and 6th round, like, I'm not against that at all whatsoever. This draft is a smorgasbord, buffet, whatever you want to say, of back talent. And if they leaned on 2 rookie backs, it's maybe a little outlandish to some. But for me, looking at this class, I'm like, yeah, that's fine. If those are the 2 best guys and they happen to be rookies, so be it.
Well, the other interesting thing is, if we're looking at the team today, what the roster is today, is it really that much worse now than it was 10 days ago at running back? What you've done is you've taken Javonte Williams out. So you've lost the pass protector. And so that is a loss, as George Payton said, that he called Javonte Williams best pass protecting back in the game. So you have lost that. But in terms of your production in the running game, you've lost the one running back among those who was averaging sub 4 yards per carry. So in terms of rushing production on a per carry basis, you lost the guy who was the least efficient one. So what did you lose, right? If you would have just given more work to Audric Estime if you didn't have Javonte Williams, or you would have given more work to Blake Watson, or you would have given, and maybe he would have stepped up, or you would have given more work to Audric Estime, and maybe he would have gotten over the fumbling issues, right? So I don't know that so even there, I'm not sure you're in too much worse of a situation, which is why, on balance, to go back to the original question, the Broncos are a much better team than they were when this free agency period started.
Yeah, you rewind 10 days and you look at it now, and you mentioned fix the glitch, and let's begin there. The glitch they fixed at safety. Now PJ Locke is a valuable reserve, assuming they keep him, which they should. But, like, that's a valuable reserve. Now you look at what they've done at linebacker. I could make the argument that Dre Greenlaw was the best linebacker, period, if he was healthy, even over Zach Bond, if he was going to be available, which he was not. So Greenlaw, all pro level. You didn't pay all pro level prices. And then Evan Ingram, man, if there's a victory lap, joyous celebration, it's going on in Broncos country once Evan Ingram was signed.
Well, you mentioned PJ Locke, and I think it's worth asking the question because the Broncos have made this type of deal, but they've gotten the veteran back in this type of deal before. Is there a trade where you get some cap relief for PJ Locke and you pick up a day 3 pick because maybe you want somebody extra? Maybe you want an extra day 3 pick to get that second running back.
Mm-hmm.
Is that the type of deal that you'd consider making, perhaps? What's more valuable, a second running back out of the draft or an extra safety? What's more valuable, a second tight end out of the draft? Remember, we did the whole 2-and-2 thing. A second tight end out of the draft from day 3 or an extra safety? I mean, these are questions that I think need to be asked, especially when that safety is getting into relatively expensive territory for a backup safety. That's the other thing that's going to come into play here, is that PJ Locke went from being an inexpensive starter to a relatively expensive third safety in terms of your team building. Now, that being said, when you have 2 players among your top safeties, Brandon Jones did miss 1 game to injury last year, but then Talanoa Hufanga obviously has a major injury concern. I would feel more secure with PJ Locke being there in case something happens with Hufanga, but it's something that you think about.
Yeah, and in this year's draft, Mace, I'm about collecting picks. More darts theory. George Payton, you're up. If you can get more darts this year, and depending on the level of the dart for PJ Locke, I would consider that. And if I look in the first neighborhood, Mace, of the AFC West, and we start out talking about running back, well, the Chargers have made their move, and they got Najee Harris. I don't look at what the Chargers have done thinking it's leaps and bounds above the Broncos. I would grade it positively. Harris is a proven back. But if I just look at the neighborhood, you see KC trading away assets, trying to keep their things together. They'll build things differently. There'll be a different iteration of the Chiefs. The Raiders we can certainly get into. But if you want to start with the Chargers, we could do that because, we think running back is like, and some fans did ask us on social networking, like, should they get Najee Harris? I was always in the no camp on that, Mace. But I don't look at the Chargers and think, wow, they really got a better deal than the Broncos have gotten.
At running back or just overall, you mean?
I would say overall, but at running back, Harris is more proven than anybody the Broncos have. But this is incomplete because the Broncos are going to get someone in the draft.
Yeah, because not that Najee Harris isn't good, but this is a running back class where there's an excellent chance of finding somebody who is an immediate upgrade on what you have, an immediate contributor at a position where there's a history of finding players who can immediately help you. I mean, running back, probably more so than any other position in the draft, running back has a history of plug and play help out of the draft. I'd say, is there another position that has that sort of hit rate for guys coming in immediately and having an impact? Probably the only one close to that, I would say, is wide receiver. Running back has the chance to be transformative more so than any other position out of the draft in terms of the ratio. Now, obviously, quarterback can be as well.
Sure.
But quarterback usually it's a little bit of a longer game, and certainly offensive line is playing the long game. Tight end is playing a little bit of a longer game as well. And then corner, I mean, look, Pat Surtain was very good as a rookie, but even there, they kind of had to work him up early in the season as well. And you take his fellow first rounder from 2021, J.C. Horn, took him really 4 years before he really got going. So running back historically, and the other thing about running back historically is you tend to know quickly whether they're the guy or not. And sometimes with running back also, because sometimes with running back, the best you see is right away. Sadly, that proved to be the case for Javonte Williams with the Broncos, but that was because of injury. But running back, you're going to usually have a pretty good idea when you open the package. Whereas with tight end, you tend to not really know for a couple of years. Running back, you tend to know right away whether you got a stud or whether you got a dud at that position. So that's another thing that's in your favor as well. Najee Harris is going to be good, but I would say this: he's dependable. Like the Chargers know
Sure.
what they're getting, but the mystery box of the draft, if you're looking for a running back, is more likely to provide you something helpful there. The Chargers going into the draft, they're basically now saying, okay, we're probably going to get our tight end answer in the draft. Now, they may feel pretty good about that because that tight end answer could be Colston Loveland, who obviously Jim Harbaugh knows. Now, the downside of that is they may be locked into moving up if they want Colston Loveland or going into day 2 for the tight end position. That's so they may be kind of caught in a spot there because, of course, they did not end up getting Evan Engram. They wanted Evan Engram. They had Evan Engram in. They talked to him. Didn't pan out for them. I mean, it basically got down to Evan Engram, Juwan Johnson, and there were multiple teams involved. Juwan Johnson, by the way, today met with media, said he talked with the Seahawks. He talked with the Broncos. He actually said Sean Payton spoke with him. So as they had Evan Engram in on that Monday, that legal tampering day, Sean Payton was also talking with Juwan Johnson, according to Juwan Johnson. So there's nothing wrong with that because you've got to have multiple irons in the fire. Like you can't just go all in for one guy. You've got to have multiple possibilities cooking, but sort of think about it with the game of musical chairs, right? And the Broncos having a couple of possibilities there. They got one. They're feeling good. The Chargers came out without a tight end, and now they're in that mix of not exactly knowing what they're going to get, whereas the Broncos can sleep well at night. And by the way, also another interesting thing on how it probably worked out really well for the Broncos, the Juwan Johnson contract, it's a longer contract. It's less per year, Cease, but it has a higher guarantee. It's nearly $5 million more of a guarantee to Juwan Johnson than the Broncos are paying to Evan Engram. So it's structured more long-term, Juwan Johnson being the answer. Evan Engram's is more of a short-term deal. So it certainly opens the Broncos up to go get a developmental tight end out of this draft as well. They're not out of the tight end mix at all by any stretch of the imagination. That's another interesting thing coming out of that. But the Broncos got that taken care of. The Chargers didn't. And I think this is another reason why you'd say the Broncos are in great shape and why they may have improved themselves the most at the areas of need, because you're sitting here today and saying, okay, the Broncos took care of something they needed to take care of, and the Chargers didn't. And what the Broncos left undone is more likely to be fixed in the draft immediately than what the Chargers left undone. So right there, that competition in the division, who's going to push the Chiefs? The Broncos got a big leg up and a better chance of solving both problems there on offense than the Chargers did by what they were able to do and what they were able to fix last week.
Yep. And I think length of contracts come into play in terms of, did anyone improve more last week in free agency than the Broncos? Well, the Broncos were smart measured, I believe is the term George Payton used, measured with their money. And by the way, J.K. Dobbins, Najee Harris, 6 in one hand, half dozen in the other. You know, Najee's got more skins on the wall in terms of consistency, but it's like kind of the same guy at this point in their career. The Broncos can go to the draft, get that young back with upside, and we'll see what goes down for the Denver Broncos. But I look at this neighborhood, and we'll even get into some of the AFC conversation if you want, because of what Buffalo did with Joey Bosa. But for me, I look at what the Raiders did and the Chargers and the Chiefs losing assets as they just try to get under the cap. I look at what Denver did as the best in the AFC West.
Yeah, best in the AFC West. In the AFC overall, honestly, Cease, I was expecting, before free agency started, I was expecting to say that the most improved team in the AFC was the New England Patriots.
Yes.
I was kind of underwhelmed by what they did.
And they had a bunch of money too.
Yeah. The money was kind of burning a hole in their pocket. Mm-hmm. I mean, they had some decent moves. I mean, I think they're a better team than they were, but they struck out in some of their big swings. I mean, I think that in the end, I think their best pickup is going to be Milton Williams on the defensive line, but I don't think they improved they didn't improve their offensive line nearly as much as I thought as they needed to. In the end, the only big pickup on the offensive line was Morgan Moses.
Mm-hmm.
That line needed much more reconstruction than that. So I think for the Patriots, I was expecting to sit here and say they were the most improved team in the AFC and that they could actually make a push for the playoffs. I think they're probably still a ways away because while I expect they'll target offensive line in the draft, I don't think they're going to be able to microwave that offensive line in the way they needed to in order to really make a potential push for a wild card spot. I think they're probably still another off season away from challenging, even though I expect Drake May to take some more positive steps off of last year and push his way into the conversation of top shelf AFC quarterbacks.
Yeah, and New England's the team with Drake May, who can be real dangerous. But Mace, where's the weapons?
Yeah.
You know, you and I could name the Patriots receivers. Maybe some fantasy GMs can't, but not many people can outside of New England. And I thought in free agency wise, like it's time to load. Drake May is really talented, and you got to protect him. And you got to give him guys to throw to, man. Better weapons, and with all that money, I thought New England would be a little bit more of a player.
Well, you know, we talk about for Denver about, okay, Keenan Allen or Amari Cooper on value contracts. Wouldn't you try this with the Patriots? Wouldn't you look to them?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, for sure.
But do they want New England? See, this is another thing. If you're Denver and you want to bolster wide receiver with veterans like that, coming off a 10-7 season, you've got a better shot here. New England coming off of the season like they had, they're farther away. It's a tougher sell. The Broncos, it's an easier sell. It's an easier sell to an Evan Engram when you have a season like that. Certainly, you know, between Bo Nix and believing in Bo and going 10-7 and Sean Payton, Bo Nix is the biggest element of that. But that record you can sell. This isn't too far away.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's not too far away within your grasp. Super quick, just because it's on my mind. We didn't really get to talk about Jeremy Chin that much.
Yeah,
as a free agent option. He did sign with the Raiders, Steve Atwater's nephew, if memory serves. And he hasn't worked out. Well, nobody's Steve, but like he hasn't worked out as maybe pre-draft we had hoped. I remember you and I talking about him pre-draft process, an exciting prospect. So it's basically Hufanga is the choice for the Broncos, and then Chin a choice for the Raiders. Hufanga if healthy, you know, maybe a bigger if, but that decision there, you know, if they had gotten Chin instead of Hufanga, how would we have felt about safety? As the Raiders, you know, make the move for Geno Smith, they get Chin at safety, they keep some of their guys, but again, a team in Las Vegas has got a lot of work to do, and they're behind the Broncos already.
I mean, I'd say Chin's ceiling is a little bit lower, and Hufanga has got that thump to him. I think Hufanga's probably a better fit for Vance Joseph because Vance wants to really attack and be aggressive. Vance is, you know, VJ's at his best when he's got the ability to roll the dice. And, you know, Zach Allen kind of alluded to that a couple of times last year. Of course, Zach's played his entire career for VJ, so he probably understands him better than anybody else in that locker room. And when you have a safety like Hufanga who loves to attack and you can break, you know, you want him attacking on the screens and swing passes. I think the Broncos got the guy who is the better fit, even though there's the greater health risk just because of the last couple of years. But Chin for the Raiders, I mean, you know, that's where you plug him in to a Pete Carroll team, and we know about the success that a lot of defensive backs have under Pete. I think it's a good fit for him, a chance to really get him going after a pretty solid season in Washington. I thought really revived his fortunes.
Yeah. And also Raheem Mostert signs with the Raiders. So not necessarily, I guess it would be buyer's remorse because they didn't pay for him. And Mostert was maybe part of a small conversation. Again, you and I didn't spend a whole lot of time with Mostert. He teams now with Zamir White there in that backfield. And it's like, okay, again, if healthy, veteran guy, speed guy, I'm not really sitting here, crying over Jeremy Chin or Raheem Mostert.
With the Raiders, it's like it's better. They're better, and they've closed the gap. Have they closed the gap enough? That's the thing. All these moves with Las Vegas, I feel like what they've done is in this division, they've put together a roster that's got a good chance to go 8-9 or 9-8 and be very competitive.
Sure.
Sort of what we said when they made the trade for Geno Smith, and of course they re-signed Max Crosby. They've taken what they have done is they've done enough to where you can't put Dub in Sharpie anymore for at least that Las Vegas home game. So it's real. I mean, if you're talking about competitive division games, the AFC West has them. Every division game is up for grabs to some degree. If you're NBC, CBS, Amazon, Fox, ESPN, every network, hey, that's going to be some pretty reliable programming if you want to pencil those into some prime slots. All those games should be pretty competitive up and down the division. But realistically, with the Raiders, I feel like they're going to be a very strong team that still finishes in fourth place. But long term for them, sees a fourth place finish, they go 9-8. They might be thinking, okay, we're a fourth place team that goes 9-8. What can we do from there? And it's certainly, and if you have a last play, if you have a team at the back end of the division, it looks like that. It certainly makes it more challenging for the Broncos, because then all of a sudden that's another couple of games where you're going to feel the heat, and it puts the onus on the Broncos and everybody, and the Chargers and the Chiefs. But with the Broncos, it puts the onus on them to run up the score in those non-division games. You've got the AFC South. You got 4 games against the AFC South. You got to at least go 3-1. The tough one in that's going to be at the Houston Texans. You'd like to win that, but you better take care of business against Jacksonville, against Tennessee, against Indianapolis. You can't lose any of those games. You play the NFC East. It's an unfortunate break that the 2 tough opponents, in all likelihood, the 2 tough games, Philadelphia, Washington, they're both road games. Dallas and the Giants are home games. That's kind of a bad break for the Broncos.
Yeah.
We'll dive into this more, but Denver's got kind of a tough schedule here. They're going to have to maybe steal a couple of games that you're not expecting. They're improved, but improved means they're going to have to step up the kind of games they can win if they're going to return to the playoffs. This is going to be a very demanding slate, and the Broncos, you hope that the moves they've made have made them ready for this. They could be a much better team, Cease, and finish with the exact same record.
That's where my mind was going, Mace. And I will say this: they're going to be battle tested.
They could be a 10-7 team, a number 7 seed, but
be more dangerous.
Exactly, because they would have been through the fire.
Yep. Mm-hmm. Battle tested this year. Now,
yeah.
I don't know if you prefer elephant or 800-pound gorilla, because I've heard both. Like, there's the elephant in the room, and there's the 800-pound gorilla in the room. We got to talk about what Cincinnati did. And it's their own guys, right? So it's not like they went out and grabbed a DK Metcalf or whatever. But the big news, and paying 2 wide receivers.
Whew.
Yeah, Jamar Chase is amazing. He's outstanding. He's next level wide receiver. And T. Higgins is no slouch either, Mace. But it's an interesting decision for a team that needs defensive help. Oh, yeah, better offensive line, defensive help. and they paid 2 of their wide receivers. But if we talk about teams improving and, who could knock the Broncos out of the postseason, it might be those Cincinnati Bengals. So because we haven't talked about it yet, even privately, we haven't talked about it. Like, what do you think of what Cincinnati did in getting them both done? They didn't have to get T. Higgins done until the middle of July.
Well, and the bonkers thing is there are now rumblings that they might be able to get Trey Hendrickson done too.
Okay.
All of a sudden, that door appears to have reopened.
Money talks, right?
Money talks, commitment talks, right?
Mm-hmm. That's right.
What is going on the banks of the Ohio River, man?
They're doing business.
Yeah. Look, we all know that team, talent-wise, is much better than 9-8. And the Broncos deserve to be in the playoffs last year. They were 10-7. You don't give that playoff spot back. I think we can objectively say that, yes, at the end of the season, the Bengals were playing better football, but the Bengals messed it up earlier on in the season. So they didn't deserve to go to the playoffs because you get there based on the body of work and what your record is. So the Bengals deservedly missed the playoffs and the Broncos went to the playoffs. But can you rely on the Bengals going 9-8 again? Probably not. And the Bengals come to Denver at some point. I keep saying that it should be a primetime game because they always play these wildly entertaining games. But at some point, the pieces are going to come together for them. We know Joe Burrow as a leader is good enough, as a quarterback is good enough. We know the Burrow, Chase, Higgins collective is a good enough passing combination to lead a team to a Super Bowl because they've already done it. This is the thing. This is another thing, Cease. And it's why, even though they have underachieved the last 2 years, why you have to always account for them. You have to account for them because they've already shown they can beat the Chiefs in Arrowhead when it matters.
Yep. They might be the team to do it.
Buffalo doesn't have that secret sauce.
Nope.
They've tried and they've tried and they've tried. They've huffed and they've puffed in the playoffs, and they can't blow that house down. But the Bengals showed they could. Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, they showed they could.
Yep.
There's not a game in the postseason, not an opponent in the postseason that they don't believe that they can win, that they don't believe they can beat.
Yep. So if we talk about teams that are hanging around the playoffs or in the playoff conversation, let's just put a pin in what Cincinnati did. And then super quick, just because I want to rant. If you're the Colts, what are you doing? Seriously, what are you doing if you're the Colts? Like, why is that? And I don't believe in Anthony Richardson. I could totally be wrong, Mace. Been wrong before. I'll be wrong again. But I don't believe they have the right quarterback. And they're just kind of spinning their wheels in a division where you could take advantage of a rebuilding Tennessee, Jacksonville, and purgatory is forever. And Houston's Houston. But if we're talking about teams around the playoffs, I don't count Indianapolis as one of those.
Here's what it feels like they're doing, Cease. It feels like they're giving themselves an out to try to save their jobs. And when I say they, I'm talking about Shane Steichen and Chris Ballard as head coach and GM. It feels like they bring in Daniel Jones. It's like, okay, Anthony Richardson doesn't have it. Well, here we'll put somebody else in. And is Daniel Jones uninspiring? Yes. But has he also won in the playoffs? Yes. I think that's the only way I'm trying to put myself in their shoes. Why would they do that? Well, if Richardson doesn't have it, let's put somebody else in who might save our asses. I mean, that has to be it, right?
The only thing I can think of.
Yeah, that it can't be anything other than that. I can't think of anything else.
Yeah. So is there anyone else in the AFC that you would think about as like what they've done is significant. New England was the one, May. So I'm glad we got to talk about the Patriots, because with all that money and that quarterback, if Drake May gets it, look out. And it starts in that division, by the way. Drake May could easily be the second quarterback in that division. And it's not because the Jets don't have a clue yet, and not because of Tua, but it's like that they could be building something there with Mike Vrabel. But they're not there yet. And those free agent moves they're not as impressive of what the Broncos have done. And we're not Broncos homers. We're not doing Homer podcast, but the Broncos have really fixed the glitch in multiple spots. And in the AFC, I can't really think of a team off the top of my head that was able to hit those categories in the way that the Broncos did.
Well, I mentioned the Houston Texans, and you say, and I do say going down to Houston's a tough game still. Certainly the Chargers found that out in January, but the Texans are worse today than they were before last week because Laramie Tunsil's no longer at left tackle. And the Texans' offensive line wasn't great to begin with. I think now some of this is on CJ Stroud, the 52 sacks he took, but some of that's on the line as well. And I don't think they got better up front. So I'd say that certainly is something that helps out the Broncos as well. And just looking elsewhere, I mean, you mentioned Buffalo earlier on. The Bosa move's interesting for them.
Doesn't it remind you of the Vaughn move? I mean, it's a different deal, but it's like they're taking their pass rusher swing again.
Yes. All right, let's go for another guy. Like Vaughn, we tried him for 3 years. Let's go for the next guy. The next guy that we think can make a difference.
Yep.
So the other thing was like, this was also for Buffalo. This was a re-signing off season because it was Greg Rousseau, it was Khalil Shakir, it was Josh Allen, among others. Like this was a keep this together off season more than bring in some parts. And look, for the Broncos, as much as we're talking about Evan Engram and Talanoa Hufanga and Dre Greenlaw, remember this was also a keep the core together off season. It was a re-signing off season. It's just that those were done months ago because it was Pat Surtain and it was Quinn Miners and it was Garrett Bowles, right? Like,
yep.
Jonathan Cooper. It was 4 re-signings between July and December. Yeah. And that was one of the reasons why it was it was notable what the Broncos did in free agency, but why in terms of salary cap space, they were in the middle of the pack with about $40 million in space when it started last week, because most of their shopping they did during the season. And I think that's something to remember when you get to next year and you look at their cap space, because I anticipate that between Nick Bonito and Zach Allen in particular, a lot of their shopping is going to be done on their own guys.
Whew, what a great show, Mace.
It's good. If you're doing a lot of your shopping on your own guys, it means you're doing something right.
Draft and develop.
Yep.
Draft and develop. So good stuff. Good stuff. Looking at what the Broncos have done. And of course, we're not done yet covering the Denver Broncos for you. And you're not done helping us out on YouTube, Mace. How can folks do that?
Like,
comment,
share,
subscribe,
hit that notification bell.
Ding. So that you never
miss.
Careful, don't shut off your mic. He's Andrew Mason. You follow him on all the socials at Mace Denver. I'm at Cecil Lammy saying OBT's BFD. Thanks for watching. Stay tuned and stay frosty.